It seems like everything possible has already been said about the good old NES. The history of this legendary console has already been discussed to the smallest detail, and its games have been completed countless times. But still, one sight of such well-known pixel landscapes evokes such a wave of nostalgia that it's impossible not to share it. Therefore, channel Drigmatic begins a series of videos about our favorite consoles. Here you can remember something pleasant from the past with us, and maybe even learn something new. Sit back, the video will be heartwarming.
And you can play them only on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
In order not to repeat too much after my colleagues, I will only briefly recall the main points in the history of the development of the NES. After releasing several popular arcade machines in the early 1980s, Nintendo decided to make its home console. As a result, in 1983, the legendary Family Computer, or Famicom, was released in Japan. The new platform delighted the players of the time. It supported a resolution of 256 by 240, which was the standard for 8-bit set-top boxes, and a palette of 54 colors, 16 of which were simultaneously displayed on the screen. This beauty was accompanied by a 5-channel sound. There were 2 channels with a square wave, 1 triangular, 1 noise, and 1 for special sounds. This 8-bit game console went on to take over 90% of the home console market in Japan. In America and Europe, the Famicom was called the Nintendo Entertainment System and had a completely different form factor. The designers tried to make the American model as different as possible from all previous consoles, because just a year before that, the local video game market collapsed with a bang. Stores simply didn't want to buy consoles, being afraid to be left with useless goods on their hands. Therefore, the NES most of all resembled a VCR, the same flat square body, and the cartridge that is loaded from the front. The console looked, to put it mildly, not very futuristic, and since the engineers did not calculate the potential strengths and carelessness of the target audience, its connector wore out a lot from careless handling. After that, the contact began to disappear in it, and the ability to load the game began to depend on the position of the stars. However, ease of use and design did the trick, and literally within a year, NES became the most popular console in the world. This was also facilitated by game support, a large assortment of games and regularly released new titles. I think it's time to remember them. Why else would we be here? The NES library is just overflowing with golden hits. And of course, there is no other option but to start with Super Mario Bros. I hope that everyone is familiar with the Lady in Distress storyline. But just in case, let me remind you. The turtle-like King Bowser kidnaps a beautiful princess named Peach, so Mario, or well, his brother Luigi, sets off to the Mushroom Kingdom to defeat all the Koopas and save the unfortunate girl. The original game consists of 8 worlds, each of which contains dozens of interesting secrets. Take for example the warp zones, with teleportation to other locations. After beating the last world, the game doesn't end. You are given a second quest, which is actually a new Game Plus mode. There are fewer checkpoints, locations become more dangerous, and opponents move at even greater speeds. It's not like Super Mario Bros. Is an easy game in itself, but playing through the hard mode can be compared to the gaming experience you get from any part of Dark Souls. Only rolling isn't included. But you can hit bricks with your hand instead, which to me seems like a fair trade. A no less iconic game is a run-and-gun action Contra. First of all, I can say that for its time, the game was quite difficult. If you could get to Gromades, a giant alien monster in a waterfall location, then you could already be considered a fairly skilled player. Well, the one who managed to defeat him could become a legend among friends. The game was that hardcore. I suppose the arcade past of the series can be blamed for this. Marketing geniuses often made the game harder, by adding hundreds of enemies, turrets and traps to each level to shake the poor gamers out of their money. However, my friends and I always wanted to kick the developer's ass and show them who is in charge, so we looked for all sorts of tricks. The most famous, of course, was the Konami Code, which gave 30 lives. Now it may seem casual, but in those days it was a necessary step to at least see the final level. Another shooting game, Duck Hunt, was very different from Contra, but just as emotionally charged. This is a classic light gun shooter where you have to shoot ducks flying out of the grass. In total, the game offers 3 modes. In the first, 1 duck flies on the screen. In the second, there are already 2 of them. And in the third, you just need to shoot at the plates. In general, a regular shooting range. If you manage to hit a bird, then a dog with prey peeps out of the grass. If not, the dog also appears and it laughs at you. You know, so viciously and mockingly. You can literally hear it in its laughter. Don't be upset though, try again, you will succeed. In fact, no, because you're a loser. Take a break from games and give the gun to your older brother. Whew, sorry, some childhood memories flooded back. By the way, did you know that in Duck Hunt, you can play not only as a hunter, but also as a duck? All this time, a second player could control the flying 8-bit bird with the help of an additional controller. This discovery greatly surprised those who thought they knew the game inside and out. I hope that for you, this fact made the video a little more informative. Ice Climber is one of my favorite platform games where you control Popo and Nana, 2 children in Eskimo parkas. The game was the debut work of Japanese programmer Kazuaki Moriata. He considered it a warm-up for some big project with a mustachioed plumber in the title role, which we already mentioned today. There was no large-scale plot. A bird steals precious vegetables from the main characters and flies to the top, and all that remains for them is to take a mallet and make their way up, encountering polar bears and fur seals. Of course, the higher we climb, the harder the obstacles. The game is extremely cute and childish. No shootouts and battles, just a couple of Eskimos trying to return their food. It sounds as harmless as possible, and this favorably singled it out against the background of many different action games. For example, such as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a platform game based on comics and cartoons about Ninja Turtles by Konami. A team of brothers consisting of Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo and Donatello set off to rescue their friend April, who was kidnapped by the main villain of the Turtles, Shredder. One of the features of this action game is that you can switch between characters at any time, and each of them has a unique weapon. As for me, Donatello was the most imbalanced. After all, he wielded a long boss staff, so I was keeping him for the bosses. Also, I like him the most as a character. He's the brain and mind of the whole team. If during the playthrough the health of one of the characters reached a critical level, you had the opportunity to change the character to another one and not lose him. And you could do that as many times as you like until each of the turtles is knocked out. And only then, game over. Go start the level from the very beginning. I should say that sometimes the game was ridiculously unfair. Just remember those electric algae and bombs. However, I kept playing it over and over, and even replayed it a few times because I loved the game. Also, I enjoyed the soundtrack so much that I even later listened to it separately from the game. For me, the biggest drawback of TMNT is the lack of co-op. I mean, we can complete the game with 4 turtles, but the developers haven't added a co-op mode? Unfortunately, it was added in the sequels, including my favorite, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist for Sega. But we'll talk about it sometime next time. Disney games on the NES stand out. They were almost always bright, cheerful and close to the original movies, exactly as much as needed. One such example is the platformer Ducktales, created by the famous Capcom. The developers understood that they were faced with an important task – to release a quality product that every cartoon fan should want to buy. And, to my mind, they did a great job. Bright graphics, favorite characters from TV screens and unique locations, including the Amazon, the African mines, the Himalayas, Transylvania, and even the Moon. Ducktales was created by cartoon lovers for cartoon lovers. Even the storyline seems to complement the animated series, because it's based on the crazy passion of Scrooge McDuck to travel and search for lost treasures. The uniqueness of the game lies in the weapon of the protagonist. With the help of a seemingly ordinary cane, Uncle Scrooge can make high jumps to overcome obstacles and fight enemies. It's nice that after more than 20 years, the developers have released an updated version for modern platforms. It turned out, by the way, no worse than the original game, so if you're scared off by pixel graphics, be sure to check out the remake. But I liked the Darkwing Duck more. He always stood out from other weekend cartoons. This Drake with Batman and James Bond traits was, well, cool. He had vehicles, a bunch of gadgets, and a signature style. In comparison to cheerful Ducktales, Aladdin or Chip and Dale, it was a real noir. The game turned out to be the same. Eternal night, a lone detective wary of life, one-on-one with a cold, indifferent city, ready to devour anyone who sticks a careless beak out of the nest. No, actually, it wasn't that dark, but definitely atmospheric. It had everything a great 2D platformer with shooting needed. For example, different ammo for the gas pistol, and a wide range of enemies, each requiring a different approach. And of course, there was also great music. The 8-bit version of the opening of the animated series was made especially well. But what wasn't there was the passwords to the levels. If you decided to go and play Darkwing Duck, then you had to beat it in one go. And even though this game was easier than Mega Man, the game it was based on, I would still like to have passwords. But, as you may know, not all games on the NES resembled children's cartoons. Suffice to say that this is where the main horror platform series of the last 35 years was born. In contrast with the Disney cartoons Mario and some Master Higgins, Castlevania looked sullen, like a goth in kindergarten. Moreover, there was even a more or less large-scale plot, according to which the first part of the epic about the Belmont clan and its confrontation with Dracula ended up being the seventh. In general, a serious, adult, and no kidding here, really atmospheric thing. Although there was nothing incredible in terms of gameplay, this game was mesmerizing with style and atmosphere. Not fists or a blaster, but a whip as the main weapon. The scenery of a huge vampire castle and evil spirits of all sorts and sizes as opponents. Bosses had such good designs that you can basically get all of them tattooed. And of course, brutal complexity. Castlevania, of course, isn't the same as before. Now it plays well and sounds amazing. What can we say about the good old days when it was unsettling to play it alone late at night? Yes, in those days it was a real horror. The last thing I would like to mention before I end my nostalgic story is Battletoads. Some may call this game the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles clone, and they will be absolutely right. Battletoads was created precisely as a competitor to TMNT. Although these amphibians have almost more charisma than the legendary four, so the clone turned out just great. In genre terms, it was a classic beat-em-up, but the Toads didn't just punch enemies in the face. They had to climb rocks, swim, and most importantly, ride bikes. Ah, that turbo tunnel! Compared to it, the famous Fair Play from the first Mafia is just a cakewalk. Of course, the game didn't provide any passwords or cheat codes, so most of my acquaintances gave up at the level with the races. It's also perhaps the most difficult game of its time. And on 8-bit consoles, the competition, as you know, is pretty tough. To be honest, I've never reached the end, and I don't know a single person who would have done it. Do you? Emulators with quick saves don't count, you know. However, despite being hardcore, Battletoads has long been the best place to kick some butts with a giant boot. Well, that's my memories of the NES and its wonderful games. Of course, this is only a small part of what is worth mentioning, so I invite you to comment. Tell us about your favorite 8-bit titles. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. We're just starting our series, and in the next video we will remember the arch rival of the NES, Sega Genesis. See you soon!